From AATH, the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor, this is Laughbox, the podcast for laughter and humor professionals. Here's your host, Chip Lutz.
Well, hello, and welcome to Laughbox, the official podcast for the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. Today, I get to talk to Don Baird. Don is a pretty funny guy. You know, when you first meet him, he's really quiet, but he has got a wicked sense of humor, and he's a psychologist, he's a professor, and I get the opportunity to share a little bit of his brain today. So welcome, Don, to Laughbox, my friend.
Hey, thank you for inviting me, Chip.
Oh, the pleasure's absolutely mine. Now, if you could tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, and then we'll start in on the topic that we're going to hit today.
Sure, I do a little bit of everything, but I teach graduate psychology students who want to be a clinical psychologist. I write, I do presentations. I was just in Montreal and did a talk about the humor of Muhammad Ali and how he used humor both when he was able to be very strong and win all those fights, and then later when his health went bad, and how humor helped him keep his sense of identity and connect to other people in good times and bad.
How very interesting, because not a lot of that came through in the movie Ali. I mean, certainly,
right.
It was good movie. However, some of that didn't really come through. But I'm interested in that and how what were some of the examples you used in the talk. I mean, we'll get into what we're going to hit on in a minute, but that just spurred my interest real quick as far as some of the things that Muhammad Ali used.
Well, actually, it was he had a very verbal, kind of aggressive humor when he was a boxing champion. He did things. He would create humorous poetry. He would predict what round he would knock out his opponent in. He would do all kinds of playful poems about boxing. But then as his health deteriorated and as he basically lost the ability to use his hands without trembling and his voice became a whisper, he still was a humorous person. Humor not only was part of his identity, it also helped him connect to other people. Uh-huh. So he started doing quiet magic tricks. He did magic tricks, making his thumb appear and disappear, pretending he could elevate. But he also even played with his sleeping spells. That he and his wife Lonnie would basically have a deal that he might start falling asleep, and then you would see him kind of reaching out and like starting to box a bit, and she would say, "Oh, this happens in his sleep. Poor man, he just starts boxing in his sleep. You don't know what's going to happen." Mm-hmm. And then after he would open his eyes and say, "Gotcha." So they even made fun of the poor ill man. They made fun of the illness. So like everything else in life, he felt like there's something to play with here. Uh-huh. So that even that quiet humor allowed him to continue that sense of his identity and connect to his fans. That he's not just this poor, sick man. He's still Ali. He always will be.
Right. Well, it's interesting because sometimes when we see somebody that's in that kind of position, we might take a different mindset with that person as far as feeling sorry for them but there's still that person in there, so that's a great thing to keep in mind, that he still had a sense of humor and he was still Ali.
Absolutely, from the beginning to the end. And I learned some of that I had a wonderful, when I was in training, Chip, in clinical psychology, I had just a wonderful supervisor named Joseph Triggs, Dr. Joe Triggs. He was a blind therapist. He was a wonderful therapist. He had a guide dog named Tristan, but he told me as I was his student that he wasn't really prepared to be a blind person. He said, life didn't predict that. I never thought of myself as that. And he just wasn't sure. He lost his eyesight when a surgery went bad. He woke up blind, being guided, set up for the guide dog. Mm-hmm. And he said, I really didn't think I could live as a blind person. And he truly had some thoughts about possibly ending his own life. Mm-hmm. And then he said but one day, I was in a deep depression, something struck me as very, very funny. And all of a sudden, my sense of humor came back, and he realized it was an aha moment. He said, I couldn't live as a solemn blind person, but I can live as a playful, funny blind person. And he said, if I can still laugh, I can still live. And those words stayed with me. And that was basically how he decided he could get going. And he was such a wonderful therapist and teacher, but he had to deal with his own despair, and humor helped him deal with his decision to keep on living.
Very interesting, which kind of leads me really nice segue into kind of like what we're going to talk about today, humor and resiliency, because I know that you and Steve Wilson are going to be doing a program at the conference in April on humor and resiliency. And I think that, that's a great segue to start thinking about how humor can give us a little bit of power over maybe our situation, or maybe just a different mindset so we can power through. So, thinking about that, what are some of the things that, when you're looking to be resilient, that humor can do for you, or how do you put it into play?
Well, part of it has to do with your appraisal of your situation. There's a cognitive psychologist that kind of set this in motion by talking about all the things we do to make a bad situation worse.
Mm-hmm.
We do like mind reading, and we know that whatever the other people around us are doing is they're saying bad things, and it's bad things about us. We're doing fortune telling. We're just predicting everything that's going to happen in the future is going to be terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Our mood goes sour. So, we do what they call emotional reasoning. And that means you're basically how you interpret the world the way your emotions are. So if you feel rotten, if you feel sad, or you're depressed or anxious, you're going to think in that way. So one of the most important things that we can do in our resiliency is to maintain our mood, a better mood. It's not just about feeling good, because mood is connected to our thoughts. We have, even our memories are connected to mood. It's kind of like, when you go to the movies, Chip, and basically they're playing a certain kind of music, either a sad music or an upbeat music or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of connects to what's happening in the film. Well, we kind of operate the same way as human beings. So if we're in a sad mood, it's much easier for us to remember sad things that happened in our past. And it's much easier to predict sad things in the future. When we're in a better mood, it's easier to remember the good things that ever happened in your past, and it's easier to predict good things that could happen possibly in the future. Mm-hmm. So maintaining your mood is not just a matter of, hey, I'm feeling good and no problems. It's a matter of actually trying to help us operate and make the most of situations, including difficult situations. But maintaining our mood is important, and humor is one of those ways of self-soothing that lets us do it in a healthy way and not an unhealthy way.
So for you personally, what are some of the things that you do to maintain that mood? What are some of your strategies?
One of the things I do is I have some favorite movies and TV shows that always help me. My very favorite TV show ever was called Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Oh.
I don't know if you ever saw it, but
I have, yes.
They take the very worst movies ever made, and they're trying to basically turn lemon into lemon pie. Okay, how can we have fun or a good time even in this terrible situation watching this ghastly movie? So they use every form of humor and play to mock, but also just enjoy what would have otherwise been a terrible experience.
Right.
So puns, wordplay, strange associations, just plain nonsense. It's done very fast. And if I spend like 10 minutes watching a Mystery Science Theater episode, really the classic good ones, my brain is suddenly there. That flexibility that it gives us, the ability to appraise a situation in more than one way, and just plain enjoyment. Mm-hmm. Because one of the key things that Rod Martin, who's written a wonderful, he's got the person in psychology research who wrote the book, The Psychology of Humor. He said the real key part of humor that basically helps us is the ability to get it, to understand the humorous connection, and to be able to see things in more than one way. like when we're depressed, we just see, okay, everything's depressing.
Right.
When we're sad, everything's sad. When we're anxious, everything's going to make us more anxious. So to be able to basically play with whatever we encounter in our life, even our own thoughts, to play with them, to be flexible with them, means that we're not just stuck. The whole point of humor is to get unstuck and to enjoy the present and to try to make the future better.
It's kind of funny when you said Mr. Science Theater 3000, I automatically had a smile on my face because it's a show that I enjoy as well. And when we get off the call, I'm probably going to Google one of my favorite episodes was a Christmas special, but they did a parody song on Roadhouse, and it was like a Patrick Swayze Christmas about roundhousing somebody and kicking their butt. It was just hilarious. I was almost crying. I was laughing so hard when I saw it because I don't know what it is about the movie Roadhouse. It's just one of those movies when it's on, I have to watch it just because it is so horrible. But when they did that whole Patrick Swayze Christmas thing, I was dying laughing. It was hilarious. It was good stuff.
Oh yeah, and what that reminds me of, Chip, is that humor and things like the Mystery Science Theater for us is like, for many people can be, okay, well, that was a funny show, that was interesting, that made me forget my problems, whatever. But for someone else, just like you with that parody song and me with certain episodes, it's like, wait a minute, we're having a personal connection to it. It's an aha moment. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened to me when I first saw the Marx Brothers movie, Horse Feathers. I had come back I was at university and attended a philosophy class, and I understood nothing. Not one word that the professor said made any sense to me. And I was feeling so dumb, and I felt my future was hopeless because I didn't understand philosophy. I couldn't understand all these long words. Mm-hmm. I just felt like I had no future. And I went to my parents' house after the lecture, feeling low, turned on the TV, and there was a Marx Brothers movie, Horse Feathers. And there was Groucho Marx doing a college lecture that was a total nonsense. Uh-huh. It was totally crazy. And it was totally preposterous. He was making sentences into nonsense on purpose. So his lecture gave me laughter and joy, and I realized, wait a minute, words could also be humorous playthings. Mm-hmm. That I could still have fun with the words that tormented me in class could actually be fun and could be played with. So to me, that was my aha awakening moment. To everybody else watching Horse Feathers perhaps that day was like, oh, that's a funny old movie. To me, it was like, wow, I can do this too. I can play with words.
Right, kind of like in the movie Good Morning Vietnam. For me being a military person, when Robin Williams is Adrian Cronauer, I think, does this whole spiel using different acronyms. I mean, he just does a whole spiel using different acronyms, which made sense to me because being a military person, you live your life on acronyms. But just the way he tooled them all together, and I was just like, yes, that is my entire life. My entire life is an acronym. Yeah, so it's kind of that personal identification is probably paramount in thinking about, because we all have different senses of humor. Like there's some things like my wife and I'll be watching at the same time. She's laughing her butt off, but it's not funny to me, and vice versa. There's some things that are just hilarious to me and don't mean anything to her. So I guess it's being reflective enough, or lucky enough, maybe in some cases, to be exposed to that thing that gives you that connection.
Yeah, exactly. It's as personal as your fingerprint, what we find funny.
So, and that's a great strategy for, looking at helping us be resilient. What are some other things that, because I know that you're a big researcher, so it's not going to be just when, your opinion on things when you come and talk at the conference. It's going to be like, these are the facts. What are some other things that you've been uncovering in your research as you prep for the conference?
Well, part of it has to do with psychology has spent a lot of its time looking at all the things that go wrong, mm-hmm. all the things that have been causing people distress and misery, and that makes sense. You want to start with there, but it's only in fairly recent times that what's called positive psychology has kind of come to the fore with looking, okay, well, what also goes right? What helps people to basically transcend whatever the most difficult situation can be. So what it's I guess one thing I want to emphasize is that I guess H.L. Mencken, the great writer, used to say that, to every complex situation, there's always one simple answer, and it's always wrong.
Nice.
Humor is part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer. It is one part of many things that can be helpful as people deal with their resilience. So to me, that's really important to emphasize. You and I and everybody in the organization love humor, and we found it very valuable personally.
Mm-hmm.
But to overemphasize, to say this is the only thing, or if you don't have my sense of humor or whatever, you're missing something. We also, Lewis Black said it best, I think. He said, that I hear all the time, laughter is the best medicine. But he said, you know what? When I'm sick, give me a shot of penicillin.
Yeah. Well, I've always looked at it as not the end all be all, but kind of like the catalyst for me to, like you said, like if I want a better mood, it can help that catalyst to be in a better mood. Or if I want to connect with somebody, it can be that catalyst to help me connect with somebody else. And it's not the only thing, but it certainly is that thing that is an operator. It makes things go a little bit smoother. And inherently,
it's like salt. You don't want to have a little bit. You don't have too much, but you want to have. If you don't have some in your green beans or your stew or something, if something very vital is missing.
That is a great analogy. Life's just going to be a little more bland without sprinkling a little humor on it.
Yeah. There's a George Burns, the wonderful comedian who said when he was in his 90s, he said he can't die, he's booked. He would talk about that there are basically the sure way to live longer is to have a life without humor. You may not live longer, but it will just seem longer.
Mm-hmm. So does, going back to what you were talking about with Muhammad Ali and, your stressors in your philosophy class. So does humor then, or being able to laugh at a situation, give you kind of a power position over it? Does it give you a little more control? I mean, what is it about it that makes that gives you that perspective?
Yeah, it gives you a choice. It gives you a choice in how you react to something. I mean, my motto, one of my things I have discovered in life is that most nonsense that you hear in life is not said by a comedian. Most nonsense you hear in life is said with a straight face. And you don't know whether to be, when you're young, you basically realize, oh gosh, that must be true because this person said this. And they, so they had a position of authority. That's why the Marx Brothers were so liberating. They would mock people in positions of authority. But it's like you have a choice with humor. You have a choice of reaction. You can appraise it in more than one way, which gives you freedom. It lets you realize, we have freedom, but we don't even often fully realize it. Part of it is because we're so desperately trying to be accepted by other people. Mm-hmm. And other people are full of advice, which is free, which is actually, it's worth every penny of it. It's free advice to basically tell you what you need to do and what you're doing wrong. And the freedom to basically say, okay, I can accept that, or I can say, well, that's nonsense. It's said with a straight face, but it's still nonsense. That gives a sense of power and sense of some control over our lives.
So, I mean, sometimes things just aren't funny. I mean, when you're going through a trial and tribulation, I mean, things just are not funny. Yeah, I know if you're in excruciating pain or what. So how do you, as a psychologist, I mean, so if I come to you and I'm just like going through the worst time, I mean, are you going to tell me, we'll go out and find something to laugh about, or are you just like, what you feel is what you feel, the humor will come later? I mean, what's the prescription, Doc?
The most important thing is compassion and empathy. Mm-hmm. Compassion towards the person's situation, and it's very important to express that you understand and take quite seriously the pain that they're experiencing or have experienced. Mm-hmm. So you're not trying to divert someone from their pain. You're not trying to divert someone from what's happened. You need to demonstrate that you really care about what's going on. You're not there to be a sit-down comedian. You're there to basically be helpful in any way possible.
I just had a vision in my mind of somebody coming and sitting on your couch, and going through a little therapy, but you're just ringing off a bunch of one-liners.
Exactly.
It's not, so I know that doesn't happen, but in my head, what I just was seeing was hilarious. So.
Yeah. And I think, the movies are filled with examples of psychologists and therapists who do variations on that, who basically, that there's something about Mary. I think there's a psychiatrist who kind of leaves during the session and then comes back just at the very end, and then makes an appearance to say, "Oh, time is up," and that's the whole thing. There's a million cliches of bad psychiatrists and psychologists in the movies. Actually, I wrote my dissertation about psychology in the movies. So the key thing is compassion and empathy, but also, one aspect of humor that way is diagnostically. If a person expresses no bit of humor in your interaction with them, just like outside of therapy, it's like, gosh, this you would notice that. You would notice, okay, this person never finds anything funny. This person only has tragedy. But it's if a person is able to express a little of it, and you hear for it, you're listening for it. Oh wow, there's some aspect of this person, a healthy part of this person that is there too. Nobody is all defective. No one is all ill. No one is all well. I'll give you an example. During my internship year, I had a plate on my desk. I was a big fan of Warner Brothers cartoons, and it was one of Michigan J. Frog. Michigan J. Frog, the singing and dancing frog. It was just there for me to help me keep my sense of humor amongst the stress of my work.
Right.
I was working with a woman client and who was extremely depressed and extremely fearful that there had been suicide in her family, and this was going to be her fate too. And we had several sessions as I tried to listen and offer encouragement and be with her. 3 sessions in, all of a sudden, she notices Michigan J. Frog on my plate, my desk.
Yeah.
And she points at that, and she stops talking about how awful her life is and going to be. And she said, "I know that cartoon. That's a great cartoon." And I pick up the plate and I hand it to her, and she holds on to it and looks at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell her, "Gosh, this is the first time you've ever said that anything in your life has ever brought you pleasure or enjoyment.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if there's anything else besides Michigan J. Frog that ever made you happy." And we started looking at that and finding that and listing those and going from, based upon her list, about things that also she has enjoyed in the past but has stopped doing now, and that maybe she might want to try doing again. So it wasn't anything I said. It wasn't a joke. It was there a part of her that could respond to humor after several weeks of being listened to was there and said, wait a minute, she loved Michigan J. Frog. She loved that cartoon. And there were other things she loved in life too. So there was like humor as a way of trying to spark,
right?
To basically help find that there are parts of her that are still hopeful.
So what I hear you saying is that sometimes, even though if things are at their darkest, that maybe you should, instead of focusing on all that negativity, but perhaps to go through and think about some of those things that maybe you found humorous or you found joyful, and maybe relive those in your head a little bit and start focusing on those to shift your focus a little bit.
Yeah, and actually go out and do some of the things that had brought her pleasure, which is what we did. Set up, listen, here's some homework. Okay, well, I see what this is like. When you kind of do some of these things that you hadn't done in a long time that were pleasurable in the past. So she had all this capacity in her, but she was, so humor helped light the light. Almost helped her find the hope. I always
Right.
feel like in working, when with ourselves or with other people in distress, finding the hope is the important thing. That's what gets us started. It's no great genius on the part of any therapist or psychologist or therapist. It's their compassion, but also helping that person together find hope.
I like that. That's nice. Now, going back to what you were saying at the very beginning with Muhammad Ali, that humor helps him connect with people. Because I know a lot of times when uh, I will have a tendency or propensity to isolate myself if I'm going through a bad time. And I think that that's probably one of the worst things I can do, to isolate myself, because then I'm my own worst enemy. I'm just stuck in my head, repeating all the negative stuff and so forth. So, humor is a connection device and bringing people in. Does that help also with your own resiliency?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's important to stay connected, and especially when you're undergoing a lot of problems or difficulties or challenges, and that if so, demonstrating the humor is part of yourself allows another person to come in, helps connect you. I mean, I used to talk to people who were very shy, who said, "I don't really want to go out. I'm not a performer," and I would say, You don't have to be, but maybe if you have a watch that basically has Homer Simpson on it instead of just Timex, or
Hmm.
if you wear a shirt that basically has something that's a generalizing, just kind of a play, there's Tweety Pie on it, instead of just a white shirt or a blue shirt. I used to carry a Charlie Chaplin tote bag with me everywhere till it wore out. And actually I also carried a Warner Brothers with Bugs Bunny on it bag. And it's amazing what happens in such instances. I was just waiting for a bus, carrying my Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny bag, and an older gentleman approached, and he said, "Oh, do you work for Warner Brothers?" I said, "Well, no, I just like the cartoons." I said, "Well, I thought you might have worked for Warner Brothers. I made a recording at Warner Brothers once with Louis Armstrong, and I just thought you might have." I thought, wow, I got to meet someone who played with Satchmo, all because I was just carrying this bag with Bugs Bunny on it.
That's funny. I had a
If you
boss.
carry something with you that attracts the right people, you can connect, even if you feel so isolated.
Right. And that could be pretty easy. I had a boss one time that I had a hard time connecting with. He was really an introvert. He took everything very literally. So I found myself avoiding him all the time. So one day I was in the passageway, and on the East Coast, they have a potato chip company called Utz Potato Chips. And my
Oh
last name's
yeah.
Lutz. And so he was walking through the passageway, and he looked at me, and I was eating potato chips, and he was like, "Oh, Utz Lutz, Utz Lutz." And so then that was my opportunity to connect. And I said, "Well, funny thing, sir, is that my own grandma actually started that potato chip company." He's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah." I said, she started in her basement. She'd peel the potatoes herself. She'd slice them. She, fry them. She'd go door to door selling them. And it started taking off. And as she started taking off, she started getting more employees, and she had to move from the basement into an actual building and a factory, and had more people working for her, and was really starting to bring a lot of money in. I said it was about the time that the Lindbergh baby had gotten kidnapped, and she started, worrying about the safety of her grandchildren and so forth. So she's like, "We need to change the name. I need to protect these kids." So she said, "Hey, get the hell out of there." And
Wow, that's great.
so he just looked at me really stoically, shook his head, and walked back in his office. But it changed the dynamic of our relationship after that.
Yeah.
That
Oh yeah.
he knew me a little bit better. We connected a little bit better after that. He wasn't. It wasn't so much him being a super, because he was the big boss, but it kind of, I don't want to say leveled the playing field, but it connected us a little bit more. So I just
Yeah,
I
yeah, and finding a similar sense of humor helps us to connect to those people that are otherwise would be strangers to us.
Awesome. Yeah, it's. I had an opportunity to interview Father John Noss. He was a professor up at Marquette University, and he was also a clown. But when I was working on my master's thesis, yeah, I got to talk to him about, because he did a class on humor in the classroom and humor in education, and he said that one thing that I always remember, that he said that humor renders learners benevolent. And
Mm.
I thought about that just in my own life, that, when there's conflicts or something else going on, that if I can find the humor and share that with somebody, that it renders them benevolent, and we're able to actually kind of connect on a different plane then.
Oh yeah,
Nice. So any other key things that, you've been coming, finding that you're like, I'm so excited about, giving this, because I'm excited about, just talking to you, I'm excited about listening, to you and Steve's program in April. I know I'll get a lot from it, and I don't want to ruin everything for me, because that's, any other teasers you want to give the listeners as far as like, hey, this is what you can kind of expect?
Well, one of the things we've been doing is kind of diving into seeing, most people would agree. Most Americans don't agree on much right now, but we all definitely agree we're living in kind of difficult times, challenging times. And so what we're doing is looking back at how people in other challenging times dealt with them and used humor as a way of trying to stay resilient and to keep going forward.
Mm-hmm.
We found some things from World War II. People in occupied Norway were actually keeping joke books of jokes and humorous things about the Nazis occupying them that helped unify them, helped them give them relief, but also helped them say, oh yeah, resistance is not just what we should do, resistance is fun. So they even turned out like there was a children's book that we found that was published at the time, at which they kind of had put in secret messages about the occupation and the occupiers and stuff. And anyway, it's just wonderful to find all these little ways in which people who were in difficult times use creativity and humor to basically stay unified, but also to help them to kind of stay resilient, keep leveling.
That's awesome.
So I love these secret messages they would do in the children's book, though, until the Nazis actually said, oh, what a wonderful book. This is the Norway's answer to Dr. Seuss. So they found out what he was really doing.
I just in my mind, I have a picture of kids playing Pin the Mustache on the Fuhrer.
There we go.
Well, I really appreciate you spending a little time with me today to share a little bit about the session that you guys are going to have at the conference, and just give some good tips for people to help them be a little more resilient. For me, thinking about my own mental well-being, I'm always looking for new things to help me bounce back a little bit faster, and you certainly give me some of that today. If after today people want to connect with you, where can they go?
They can email me at dbaird3k@gmail.com. They can visit my website, sufferingishighly-overrated.net. Anyway, either of those places, and I look forward to seeing everybody at AATH in April.
I like that. I like that website, sufferingisoverrated.net.
Sufferingishighly-overrated.net. Yes.
I like that. Well, thanks so much for spending time with me today, Don. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Chip. Thanks for the great recording.
This is Laughbox, the podcast for laughter and humor professionals. Laughbox is made possible by a grant from the National Speakers Foundation and is brought to you by AATH, the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. Find out more at aath.org. Be sure to review Laughbox on iTunes. For show notes and more information about today's conversation, visit laughbox.aath.org.